The scent of sizzling bacon and stale coffee hung heavy in the air, a familiar comfort in the sleepy town of Harmony Creek. It was just past noon when Sergeant Elias Thorne pushed open the diner door, the bell above chiming a cheerful, almost mocking, welcome. He wasn't looking for fanfare. He was looking for a quiet corner, a hot meal, and a moment of peace after a long morning of errands. Elias, a man whose shoulders still carried the phantom weight of a rucksack, and whose eyes held the distant gaze of distant lands, moved with a quiet dignity that belied the weariness etched around them. His uniform, neatly pressed and adorned with ribbons that whispered tales of bravery and sacrifice, spoke volumes, yet he wore it with an understated humility. He'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan, seen things no man should, and returned to a country he loved, a country he'd bled for. All he wanted now was a simple lunch. He chose a booth by the window, the sunlight streaming in, momentarily warming his face. The diner, Peggy Sue's, was a local institution, known for its hearty portions and folksy charm, or so he'd heard. A young waitress, her apron stained with the day's first spills, approached his table, a pad and pencil in hand. Her smile, however, seemed to falter as her gaze swept over his dark skin, then lingered almost uncomfortably on the uniform. Elias, accustomed to the subtle shifts in human interaction, merely offered a polite nod. "Just a coffee to start, please," he said, his voice a low rumble, softened by years of quiet command. The waitress mumbled something inaudible and retreated to the counter, her steps noticeably slower than when she'd greeted the elderly couple at the next table. Minutes stretched. The aroma of brewing coffee filled the diner, but none arrived at Elias's table. He watched as other patrons were served, their laughter and chatter filling the space. The elderly couple, now enjoying their pie, glanced his way, their expressions unreadable. A knot began to tighten in Elias's stomach, not from hunger, but from a familiar bitter taste. He'd faced bullets and bombs, navigated treacherous landscapes, and stood firm in the face of fear. But the quiet, insidious sting of prejudice, the kind that didn't announce itself with shouts but with averted eyes and lingering silences, was a different kind of wound. It was a wound that never truly healed, only scarred over, ready to reopen at the slightest provocation. He tried to tell himself it was nothing, a busy kitchen, a forgetful waitress. But deep down, he knew. He always knew. He caught the eye of the owner, a stout man with a perpetually flour-dusted apron and a stern gaze, who was now leaning against the counter, observing him with an intensity that felt less like curiosity and more like scrutiny. The owner whispered something to the waitress, who then avoided Elias's gaze entirely, busying herself with wiping down an already clean counter. The air in the diner, once warm with the promise of comfort, now felt thick with unspoken tension. Elias felt his jaw clench, a muscle twitching in his temple. He had fought for the freedom of this country, for the very right of people to sit in a diner like this, to enjoy a meal without judgment. And yet, here he was, a decorated veteran, being made to feel invisible, unwelcome, less than. The irony was a cruel twist of the knife. He waited, patiently, for another 10 minutes. The coffee never came. The waitress never returned. The owner remained at the counter, his eyes occasionally flicking towards Elias, a silent, chilling message in their depths. Elias finally pushed himself up from the booth, the worn leather groaning in protest. He didn't make a scene. He didn't raise his voice. He simply walked towards the exit, his head held high, his uniform a stark reminder of the principles he had sworn to uphold, principles that seemed to be in short supply in this particular establishment. As he reached the door, the owner's voice, gruff and dismissive, finally broke the silence. "We don't serve your kind here." The words, though expected, still landed like a physical blow. Elias paused, his hand on the door handle, and without turning, he simply nodded, a slow, deliberate acknowledgement of the profound disrespect. Then, he stepped out into the bright sunlight, leaving the smell of bacon and the bitter taste of injustice behind. The bell above the door chimed again, a final, hollow sound. The words echoed in Elias's ears long after he'd left Peggy Sue's. "We don't serve your kind here." It wasn't the first time he'd encountered such blatant prejudice, but each instance was a fresh wound, a reminder that despite his service, despite his sacrifices, some invisible line still separated him from others in the very land he had sworn to protect. He walked down Main Street, the quaint storefronts and cheerful window displays blurring into an indistinct haze. The humiliation burned, a slow, steady ember in his chest. He, Sergeant Elias Thorne, who had led patrols through hostile villages, who had comforted dying comrades, who had stood guard over the ideals of liberty and justice for all, was deemed unworthy of a simple meal because of the color of his skin. The injustice was a heavy cloak, suffocating him. He thought of his grandfather, a veteran of World War II, who had returned from fighting fascism abroad, only to face segregation and discrimination at home. Elias had grown up hearing stories of separate water fountains, back entrances, and whispered slurs. He'd believed, perhaps naively, that those days were largely behind them, that the world had moved forward. His own military service, where men and women of all backgrounds stood, shoulder to shoulder, united by a common purpose, had reinforced that belief. In the crucible of combat, race, religion, and origin faded into insignificance. Only competence, courage, and camaraderie mattered. He had found a brotherhood there, a sense of belonging that transcended superficial differences. To be reminded so starkly of those differences, back on American soil, felt like a betrayal of everything he had fought for. He found solace, as he often did, in the quiet solitude of the town's small park. He sat on a bench beneath a sprawling oak tree, its branches reaching towards the sky like gnarled, ancient arms. He pulled out his phone, his fingers hovering over the screen. Should he post about it? Should he call someone? His first instinct was always to handle things quietly, to absorb the blow and move on. He wasn't one for grand pronouncements or public outcry. His strength lay in his resilience, his ability to endure. But this felt different. This felt like a direct assault on his dignity, on the very uniform he wore. He thought of the young soldiers he had mentored, the ones who looked up to him. What message would it send if he simply let this pass? That it was acceptable, that their sacrifices meant less? As he wrestled with his thoughts, a familiar face appeared on the path. It was Marcus "Mac" O'Connell, a retired Army Ranger who ran the local hardware store. Mac, a burly man with a booming laugh and a heart of gold, had served alongside Elias's father in Vietnam. He was a pillar of the community, known for his unwavering integrity and his fierce loyalty to his fellow veterans. Mac spotted Elias, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a look of concern. "Elias, everything all right, son? You look like you've seen a ghost." Elias hesitated, then slowly recounted the incident at Peggy Sue's, his voice low, tinged with a raw emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. He described the cold stares, the whispered words, the blatant refusal of service. Mac listened, his face darkening with each word. His jaw tightened, and his eyes, usually twinkling with good humor, now held a steely glint. When Elias finished, a heavy silence hung between them. Mac finally broke it, his voice a low growl. "That old bigot, Hank Miller. I always knew he had a mean streak, but this is beyond the pale." He stood up, pacing back and forth, his hands clenched into fists. "You served this country, Elias. You put your life on the line. And he dares to treat you like that?" Mac's anger was palpable, a stark contrast to Elias's quiet resignation. "This ain't right, Elias. Not one bit right. And we ain't gonna let it stand." Elias looked at Mac, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He hadn't expected such a fierce reaction, such immediate solidarity. Mac's outrage was a balm to his wounded pride, a reminder that not everyone in Harmony Creek shared Hank Miller's prejudiced views. The injustice, though still burning, now felt a little less solitary. Mac O'Connell was a man of action, not just words. His fury at the injustice done to Elias was a spark that quickly ignited a fire. He didn't just commiserate, he strategized. "This isn't just about you, Elias," Mac had said, his voice firm. "This is about every man and woman who's ever worn the uniform and every person who's ever faced prejudice. We can't let this kind of hate fester in our town." He pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the keypad. "I'm calling the guys, every single veteran I know, and not just the local chapter. We're going national with this." Elias watched, a mix of apprehension and a burgeoning sense of hope stirring within him. He was a private man, unaccustomed to being the center of attention, especially for something so painful. But Mac's conviction was infectious. Within hours, the quiet outrage of Harmony Creek began to ripple outwards. Mac's network was vast, built over decades of service and camaraderie. He started with the local VFW and American Legion posts, sharing Elias's story with a raw, unvarnished honesty that resonated deeply with his fellow veterans. The story of a decorated black veteran being refused service at a small-town diner, because of his race, after all he had given for his country, struck a nerve. It wasn't just an isolated incident, it was a symbol of a deeper, persistent struggle. Calls were made, emails sent, and social media groups buzzed with indignant fury and a shared sense of purpose. The message was clear. An attack on one veteran was an attack on all. The idea of a convoy began as a whisper, then grew into a roar. It wasn't about aggression or violence. It was about presence. A silent, powerful demonstration of solidarity. "We're not going to protest with signs," Mac explained to Elias later that evening, his eyes gleaming with determination. "We're going to protest with our numbers, with our uniforms, with the very vehicles that represent our service. We're going to show Hank Miller, and anyone else who thinks like him, that this country stands for something more than hate." Elias felt a lump form in his throat. The loneliness he had felt earlier that day, the crushing weight of injustice, began to lift, replaced by a profound sense of gratitude and belonging. He was not alone. News of the planned convoy spread like wildfire. Veterans from neighboring towns, then from across the state, and even from distant states, began to pledge their support. Retired generals, active duty sergeants, young recruits, and seasoned veterans from every branch of service. They all answered the call. They shared stories of their own experiences with prejudice, both subtle and overt, and spoke of the sacred bond that united them. The convoy wasn't just for Elias, it was for every veteran who had ever been marginalized, for every person who had ever felt unseen or unheard. It was a testament to the enduring power of unity and the unwavering commitment to justice that defined their service. Elias spent the night in a state of restless anticipation. He thought of the quiet dignity he had tried to maintain in the face of humiliation. Now, a different kind of dignity was emerging, born from the collective strength of his brothers and sisters in arms. He imagined the convoy, a line of military trucks, jeeps, and even some personal vehicles, all adorned with flags and insignias, rolling into Harmony Creek. It wouldn't be a chaotic spectacle, but a disciplined, respectful display of force. The force of unity, of principle, of unwavering support. The thought brought tears to his eyes, tears not of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude and a renewed sense of hope. The turning point wasn't just an external event. It was an internal shift, a healing of the invisible wounds that had festered for too long. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, Harmony Creek would learn the true meaning of respect. The morning dawned crisp and clear in Harmony Creek, but the usual tranquility was replaced by an electric hum of anticipation. Word had spread like wildfire through the town, whispered from porch to porch, shared in hushed tones over coffee cups. Everyone knew. Something was coming. Hank Miller, the owner of Peggy Sue's, had arrived at his diner earlier than usual, a nervous energy about him. He'd heard the rumors, dismissed them as exaggeration, but a nagging unease gnawed at him. He glanced out the window, expecting the usual quiet street. What he saw instead made his blood run cold. In the distance, a low rumble began, growing steadily louder, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through the very foundations of the town. Then they appeared. First, a lone Humvee, its dark green paint gleaming in the morning sun, an American flag fluttering proudly from its antenna. Behind it, another, and another. Then a long line of military trucks, some old, some new, jeeps, and even a few civilian pickups adorned with veteran decals and flags. It wasn't a chaotic mob. It was a disciplined, silent procession. Each vehicle was meticulously clean, each flag crisp, each driver a picture of quiet determination. The convoy stretched for blocks, a powerful, undeniable testament to solidarity. They didn't stop in front of Peggy Sue's. Instead, they slowly, deliberately circled the town square, their engines a steady, unwavering pulse. The sheer scale of it was breathtaking. People spilled out of their homes, their faces a mixture of awe and confusion. Children pointed, their eyes wide with wonder. The silence from the convoy was deafening, broken only by the rumble of engines and the rustle of flags. There were no shouts, no angry signs, no aggressive gestures, just presence, a monumental, undeniable presence. Hank Miller watched from his diner window, his face pale. The usual morning rush was non-existent. No one was coming in for breakfast. Instead, they were all outside, watching the spectacle. He saw the faces of his neighbors, some curious, some bewildered, but many with expressions of quiet disapproval directed not at the convoy, but at his diner. The weight of their collective gaze was heavier than any angry shout. He felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. This wasn't just about one man anymore. It was about the entire town, about the principles they held dear, about the reputation of Harmony Creek itself. Then, the convoy began to peel off, one by one, parking neatly along the streets surrounding the square. From each vehicle emerged men and women in various stages of military dress, some in full uniform, some in veteran caps and jackets, all with the same quiet dignity Elias possessed. They gathered in the town square, forming a silent, respectful assembly. Elias, standing amidst them, felt a surge of emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. He saw Mac O'Connell at the head of the gathering, his eyes meeting Elias's in a silent acknowledgement of their shared purpose. A hush fell over the square. Then, Mac stepped forward, his voice, usually booming, now carrying a solemn weight. "We are here today," he announced, his voice echoing across the square, "not to cause trouble, but to stand for what is right." Yesterday, a decorated veteran, Sergeant Elias Thorne, was refused service at Peggy Sue's diner because of the color of his skin. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Sergeant Thorne served this country with honor and distinction. He fought for the freedoms we all enjoy, and to deny him service, to deny him respect, is an insult to every man and woman who has ever worn this uniform, he continued. We believe in justice, we believe in respect, and we believe that every person, regardless of their background, deserves to be treated with dignity. He then turned towards Peggy Sue's, his gaze unwavering. "Hank, Miller, your actions yesterday were a stain on this community, but we are here to show you that Harmony Creek stands for something better." As he spoke, a line of veterans led by Mac, slowly, deliberately, walked towards the diner. They didn't enter. They simply stood, shoulder to shoulder, forming a silent guard outside the establishment. Their message was clear, powerful, and undeniable. The emotional reward for Elias wasn't just the public acknowledgement of the injustice. but the overwhelming, tangible display of unwavering support from his military family, a bond forged in fire, and now standing strong against the chill of prejudice. The silent vigil outside Peggy Sue's lasted for hours. The veterans stood, unmoving, a living wall of principle and solidarity. The town square remained hushed, the air thick with unspoken tension and a palpable sense of shame emanating from the diner. Hank Miller, trapped inside his own establishment, watched the scene unfold, his face a mask of disbelief and growing despair. No customers dared approach. The convoy, parked around the square, was a constant, silent reminder of his actions. The economic impact was immediate, but the moral weight was far heavier. He saw the faces of his neighbors, once loyal patrons, now looking at him with a mixture of disappointment and condemnation. As the afternoon wore on, a different kind of movement began in the square. Local businesses, ashamed of the stain on their town's reputation, started bringing out coolers of water and sandwiches, offering them to the standing veterans. Children, initially wide-eyed spectators, began drawing chalk messages of support. On the pavement, "Thank you, veterans, harmony for all, respect." The community, initially shocked, was now actively participating in the quiet protest, transforming it from a demonstration of outrage into a powerful display of unity and redemption. Finally, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the square, Hank Miller emerged from his diner. His shoulders were slumped, his face drawn. He walked slowly towards the line of veterans, his gaze fixed on Elias. The square fell completely silent. "Sergeant Thorne," Hank began, his voice hoarse, barely a whisper. I was wrong. Terribly wrong." He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "My actions yesterday were inexcusable. They were born of ignorance and fear, and they dishonored you, your service, and everything this country stands for." He took a shaky breath. "I am deeply, truly sorry." It wasn't a grand speech, but the sincerity in his voice was undeniable. The weight of the day, the silent condemnation of the convoy, and the unwavering dignity of the veterans had broken through his prejudice. He extended a trembling hand towards Elias. Elias, after a moment's hesitation, took it. The handshake was firm, a silent acknowledgement of a bridge being built, however fragile. "I hope," Hank continued, his voice gaining a little strength, "that you and your comrades will allow me to make amends. Lunch, on me for everyone. Today, tomorrow, whenever you wish." The next day, Peggy Sue's was a different place. The convoy had departed, leaving behind a profound shift in the town's atmosphere. Elias, accompanied by Mac, walked into the diner. This time, the bell above the door chimed a welcoming sound. Hank Miller, standing behind the counter, offered a genuine smile. The diner was bustling, filled with a diverse crowd of patrons, many of whom were veterans, their faces reflecting a newfound pride and a sense of belonging. The air was no longer thick with tension, but with the comforting aroma of food and the warmth of genuine community. Elias sat at the same booth by the window, the sunlight still streaming in, but this time it felt truly warm. The young waitress, her smile no longer faltering, brought him a steaming mug of coffee, her eyes reflecting a newfound respect. Hank Miller himself came to his table, not just to take his order, but to share a quiet conversation, to listen to Elias's stories of service, to truly see the man behind the uniform. The restaurant, once a symbol of division, was slowly transforming into a beacon of reconciliation. The story of Elias Thorne and the convoy of military trucks became a legend. In Harmony Creek, a powerful reminder that prejudice, though insidious, could be confronted and overcome by unity and unwavering principle. It taught the town that true patriotism wasn't just about flags and anthems, but about upholding the ideals of justice, equality, and respect for all. Elias, who had once walked away from Peggy Sue's with a heavy heart, now walked in with his head held high, not just as a veteran, but as a symbol of hope and the enduring power of human kindness. He once felt invisible, an outsider in his own country. Now he was seen, honored, and embraced. And every time he walked into Peggy Sue's, the scent of bacon and coffee no longer carried the bitter taste of injustice, but the sweet aroma of redemption, a testament to a community that chose to heal, to learn, and to stand together. The chill that had once settled in his heart was replaced by a warmth that spread through the town, a reminder that even in the face of darkness, the light of solidarity can always prevail.